Dread filled a human soldier's heart as he stared at a freshly heated white meat bun bouncing up and down in someone's hands. All you gotta do is take a grenade launcher off of some shithead in Bravo Company, and put it on Kuribayashi's rifle, and it's all yours, Eli said with an evil grin. Coleman watched with dead eyes as Eli seduced the armorer with his illicit contraband. It was as if he was a dealer trying to hustle a new buyer. The man rubbed his bald head right next to his 5-ton workshop truck. Eli tended to bend the rules where he could and push his limits, and the crazy bastard seemed to just keep getting away with whatever scheme he was running. Leadership didn't want to punish him severely whenever Eli crossed a line, mainly because he was a medic, and a damn good one at that. I don't know, man. I don't want to get in trouble, the armorer replied in trepidation, but his eyes never left the meat bun. Eli clicked his tongue in annoyance and pulled another blue meat bun and a box of bisacodil out of his bag. Fine, I'll throw in my last one and some bisacodil because you're doing me a solid, he said while shaking the box. The armorer's eyes went wide at the sight of real food and the possibility to defecate again. MREs had been hard on the poor man. It was as if every piece of food in that infernal thing was designed to make you constipated. Eli repressed the sinister smile that was about to form on his face. He was holding literal gold in his hands, and he knew it. Coleman sighed at the sight of the poor armorer being hustled. He wanted to stop him, but he couldn't bring himself to speak up. Things were about to get more intense outside the wire, and they needed every advantage they could get. Not only that, but the lizards were adapting. Their platoon alone had been into more new weapons and tactics than someone could shake a stick at. Most of what they encountered was ineffective and or suicidal, but the fact they're trying something new was a dangerous precedent. Eventually, they were going to run into something that would work, and eventually someone was going to go down. One now, and one after the job's done? Eli enticed the man. The armorer's eyes started to dart around in indecision. It had been a couple of weeks since he ate something other than an MRE, or whatever abomination the mess hall could slap together. Come on! When was the last time you ate actual food? Eli's signature sly smile was spread across his face. The armorer looked around the room for an instant, before tapping the armory console and pulled up Bravo Company's weapon list. All right. I'll notify them to have a few of their weapons brought in to be gauged, and I'll rip one off of them, the man said, tapping away at his console. Leaving the armorer to his own devices, the two proceeded to make their way to the barracks to pick up their two privates. Eli had his hands interlocked behind his head with a satisfied smirk on his face. The moment they'd gotten access to the Imperial cafeteria, Eli spread his slimy tentacles out and made sure everyone on the base owed him favors. From the mosquito-winged privates that performed duties for him to the workshop first sergeant swapping a grenade launcher. Eli's depravity knew no bounds. Coleman sighed. He knew what he was doing was technically not against the rules, but it was only a matter of time they came down on this. Kingpin and his meat bun empire. This was why Eli never advanced in rank. Ever. He should have been a sergeant way before Coleman, but Eli always got as close as he could to breaking the rules, never doing enough for them to NJP him, but close enough for them to have to respond with something. Eli was one of the battalion's best medics, someone who would frequently run into a hail of bullets to drag a wounded soldier out of the field of fire, or be right behind you when entering a hole or laying hate just as well as any grunt. It also didn't help that Eli's natural charisma was so potent. Their lieutenant and company commander would turn a blind eye to almost anything they could, as long as it didn't bring the ire of the sergeant major or battalion commander. If only he would use his intelligence and charisma for something constructive. At least, he usually used it for the benefit of the platoon or his own entertainment. Walking through the doors of the prefabbed barracks, the two men immediately spotted the rest of their fire team huddled around a projector with the rest of the platoon. They immediately spotted the classic that was playing.
Big Duke 6 Eagle Thrust. Put on Sidewar up. Sing it loud. Into the Romeo Foxtrot. Shall we dance?
The voice from the projector said. Everything seemed to vibrate as the thumping of ancient rotors filled the room. One of the more aggressive classical pieces from an ancient era started playing as the screen panned out, showing the UH-1 Huey and OH-6 helicopters flying in formation across a large blue body of water. Eli and Coleman were going to call out to the privates, but stopped at the scene. They had to watch it too. Da 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 da. A chorus of soldiers sang along with the rhythm of the music. The group kept singing as the flight of helicopters neared its destination. The American soldiers aboard these helicopters were checking their weapons and slapping their magazines on their heads in preparation for what was to come. "God, I fucking wish I was there," a soldier randomly said to the left of Eli. These ancient movies romanticized war in ways that always left its viewer excited and always left a dangerous message. That war was fun. Eli briefly looked over to see who it was. A pale and gruff corporal by the name of Poindexter stood there, shifting with eagerness in his eyes. The scene turned to a village with school children in the courtyard being corralled by their teacher and a Vietnamese soldier. "What about you, Doc? Doesn't this make you want to ride in and start fucking shit up?" Poindexter said animatedly. Eli locked eyes with the name for a moment before turning back to the screen. He usually brushed off what this adrenaline junkie had to say, but he thought for a moment. Was war fun? "Not particularly," Eli replied impassively. Poindexter broke out in a hearty laugh, as if he was told the most ridiculous thing, and smacked Eli on the back. "Don't lie to me, Doc," Poindexter shot back, still somewhat laughing. His jovial smile turned sinister when he refocused his gaze back on Eli. "I've seen the way you fight. You're a vicious little shit," the man said as he firmly gripped Eli's shoulder. The room seemed to give out low cheers as the opera singer opened up, and the helicopters reappeared, this time flying just a few dozen meters off the ground, approaching the village in an attack formation. "Admit it, you love it," Poindexter said with almost a smug grin on his face. Everyone was on the edge of their seat, their hearts pumping, just waiting for the climax. The moment 70mm Hydra rockets and machine guns fired away at straw huts and the village inhabitants, the group of soldiers cheered. "Yeah!" The soldiers cheered loudly during the crescendo of the song. Eli couldn't help himself, but felt a twinge of excitement as well. But he kept his face neutral as he shrugged Poindexter's hand off his shoulder and gave him the side-eye. "Huh. I wouldn't be a hell jumper if I wasn't vicious." Eli huffed at the man and shrugged his hand off his shoulder. Poindexter erupted in another bout of laughter and started to slap Eli's back harder, to his chagrin. The orgy of violence continued as straw houses exploded and defenders were gunned down. Even though the crowd grew elated, Kuribayashi seemed to enjoy it the most, especially when a straw house exploded in a fiery mess. The woman seemed to rub her legs together while biting down on her lip with a sultry expression. The woman moaned as she stared at the screen. Coleman, Eli, and Poindexter raised an eyebrow at the sight of the squirming woman. When the helicopters were directly over the village, and the door gunners started engaging targets, the woman immediately shot up to her feet. "Shoot those motherfuckers!" She immediately yelled at the top of her lungs. This got the group of soldiers to get on their feet as well, joining her in the cheer. "Well, you definitely don't like it as much as her," Coleman quipped. Poindexter shook his head in amusement as he headed further into barracks. As the scene wound down in intensity and the napalm dropped, Coleman decided it was time to go. "Schmidt, Kuribayashi, get up. We've got shit to do," he called out loudly. The two in question turned around, but it was only Kuribayashi that seemed to hate the idea. Eli and Coleman watched as they saw Schmidt get up and make his way towards them. The private knew what was up. It was code for food and he wasn't going to miss out on some imp grub. However, Kuribayashi was a little more dense. Eli watched in exasperation as she leaned over her chair with her knees in the seat. But Sarge!" she protested as if she was kicked in the gut. She bent over during her complaint, swinging her large chest in front of some poor soul sitting behind her. The soldier just stared forward, eyes bulging as if he saw a 5-ton truck coming straight at him. "Kuribayashi, stop fucking around and let's go," Schmidt said in anxious irritation. This daft woman. They all just came back from the horrors of the mess hall. Couldn't she figure out it was time for the sergeant's daily study session? "No! You can't make me! You're going to make me clean the latrines again!" she said defiantly. She sat back down and turned her back to the fire team. Coleman face-palmed and Eli rubbed his eyes and they watched the idiocy in front of them. "Can't we just leave her?" Schmidt quietly and desperately asked. Coleman and Eli gave him the stink eye at the same time. "Eli, please take care of this for me," Coleman ordered in exasperation and left the building. Kuribayashi had always been a problem child, too independent and hard-headed for most squads, always thinking she knew better than her superiors. The problem with that was, she usually did. Coleman's fire team was effectively her last chance, and he was tasked to rein her in. But for some reason, she seemed to only really listen to Eli. Giving a long and drawn-out sigh, The surly medic made his way towards the group of soldiers still seated around the screen. They all stopped paying attention to the classic still playing in the background, and eyed him cautiously as he approached. Trying to get Kuribayashi to cooperate was already difficult, but when she was off duty, getting her to do fucking anything was nearly impossible. So the platoon observed and wondered just what in the ever-loving fuck this guy was going to do. "Get the fuck out of my way or no more laxatives," he said to the horror of the entire platoon. Chairs screeched and bodies dove as the platoon made way and parted like the Red Sea before Moses in the stories of old. Eli casually strode through the opening made for him, while Kuribayashi cautiously observed him in the corner of her eye. He gently grabbed Kuribayashi by the shoulders, then pushed her short, light brown hair from her ear, and let out a warm breath which traveled down the nape of her neck. She was surprised by the sudden intrusion into her personal space, but her eyes went wide when she heard his soft voice. "I guess you don't want that grenade launch, huh?" Eli sweetly purred in her ear. Kuribayashi's face turned deep red as she recoiled back, landing on the floor in a start. She held her chest with one hand and pointed her finger at the man with the other. Eli stood there with his hands on his hips, with a mischievous smirk staring down at the woman. Kuribayashi's mouth flapped, trying to find the words to reprimand him for his harassment, but she immediately stopped when she realized what he said. "Wait, you got it?" she muttered in disbelief. Eli immediately turned around and started walking towards the door. "Wait!" Kuribayashi yelled, trying to scramble to her feet. He was already out the door by the time she grabbed her things and ran after him. "Eli, I said wait!" she yelled, bursting through the door. Silence reigned in the rest of the room as everyone looked at each other trying to figure out what the fuck just happened. Bursting through the door of the barracks, Kuribayashi immediately began to look around and see which direction her surly medic took off in. When the excited private finally spotted the man she was looking for, she nearly knocked down a group of soldiers walking towards the door as she set off in a sprint. "Eli!" Kuribayashi called out again. Eli turned his head to finally acknowledge the voice, but his eyes nearly bulged out of his head as he saw a mass in midair about to hit him. He immediately braced himself as he caught the woman, preventing her from fully spearing him in the gut. The tackle hit him with enough force that the two nearly fell, and they staggered a good 5 to 10 meters. "Fuck me!" Eli cried out. He pushed down on Kuribayashi's head with his hand in an attempt to force her away, but with her iron grip, escape was impossible. The woman was simply too strong and too determined to not let him go. "Maybe? Did you really get me a grenade launcher? How?" she asked excitedly. Eli's eyes twitched at her response, causing whatever he was going to say to get caught in his mouth. "God, unhand me, wench!" he finally sneered, but chose to ignore her first comment. Kuribayashi switched from hugging his body to wrapping around his arm, her chest pressed against him. Her victim started to turn red from the bold and unexpected move, but he made no attempt to resist. "Nope! Tell me more or we'll continue to attract unwanted attention," she said playfully. Eli looked around to see that literally everyone was staring at them. Soldiers were either whispering to each other, gawking, or laughing. The woman was going to be the death of him, or at least the Article 14 of him. "Why are you the way that you are?" he sighed in derision. Eli just stuck his hands in his pockets and decided to accept his fate, while he started walking to catch up with the rest of the fire team. Kuribayashi, meanwhile, stuck to his arm and smiled up at him and pressed him further. "Well, are you going to tell me?" she asked innocently. Using his free hand to rub the back of his neck, Eli wondered if he made a mistake hooking her up like this. Looking down at the woman, he saw just how excited she was. It was weird to be excited to carry more weight, but who was he to judge? "Yeah, I managed to get you a 40mm, he admitted. Kuribayashi gasped as she tightened her already iron grip on his arm, and with a look of admiration in her eyes. Getting anything that wasn't initially issued to you was a nightmare, especially if you're a private. Eli just swooped in and got what she'd been after since joining the army as if it was nothing. "Really? You're the best! How did you do it?" She borderline yelled her admirations. This, however, caused a group of soldiers offloading supplies from a truck to pause and stare at them. One of them was about to foolishly open their mouth to call out to the pair once they recognized who they were. Kuribayashi, however, had death in her eyes as she menacingly glared at them. The look told them to shut the fuck up and mind their business, or the possibility of violence was very real. "Don't worry about that. Just bring your weapon to the armorer tomorrow to be gauged. You'll get a nice surprise if you do. Eli had casually shifted his eyes away from her before he could see her intimidating look. By the time he looked back down, she had an innocent look on her face. Kuribayashi started humming in satisfaction while she maintained her illegal occupation of Eli's arms. Say, Eli, what do you plan on doing when your contract is up? Are you going to commission as an officer like Sergeant Coleman? She asked out of nowhere. Eli was slightly taken aback by the abrupt question, but he already knew what he was going to do once his time was up. Hell no! I hate the Army and I want to get out! I'm framing my DD-214, discharge from service papers. If I have to work for the government again, I'd rather be the one fucking and not the one fucked, he said with bitterness in his voice. Really? Aren't you exactly the type of person Special Forces would be looking for? Kuribayashi was shocked by his zeal. Eli tilted his head in confusion. Why would she assume he would be remotely qualified for something that high speed? He knew he was a shitbag. Most of what he did was out of spite. A lot of what he did was overlooked. He was certain the only reason he wasn't thrown out was because he had a ranger tab and belonged to their special little club. What? Why in the world would you think I would fit in with them? He said in bewilderment. Kuribayashi put her free hand to her chin and started to think. You're a great medic. Clever, amazing fighter, stubborn, and you don't listen well. Kuribayashi started throwing up a finger for each reason she listed. Eli couldn't tell if she was complimenting him or throwing subtle jabs, but being in the Army was a means to an end. I never wanted to be a medic. I just needed to get the fuck out of where I was, but in both my desperation and ignorance, I believed my recruiter wasn't a rat bastard, he explained. Kuribayashi frowned. She hoped he got out of whatever situation he was in. The military wasn't a bad choice, but she could tell it was the last resort for him. I wanted to be a medical laboratory specialist. My recruiter told me those weren't available and I'd have to wait months before I could apply. Eli continued, but sounded more and more irritated as he continued. Then he told me he'll do me a solid. If I add medic to the list of specialties I'm interested in, he'd work some magic and get me the job I really wanted when I was in MEPS. Military Entrance Processing Stations. His voice slightly raised, as did his blood pressure from recounting his experience. Kuribayashi cringed hard at that. She had to consider herself lucky. Her family had a long lineage of being in the military, and she had the added benefit of having second-hand knowledge on how slimy recruiters could be. And you didn't get the job you wanted, Kuribayashi interjected, knowing the end of the story. Needs of the Army, Eli replied, deadpan. Kuribayashi wanted to find words of comfort, but she thought better of it. From what little she knew of the corporal, she knew he didn't want any sympathy. So, she just squeezed his arm a little tighter and walked on in silence. She had one lingering thought. People with his story were usually unmotivated and poor performers. So how the hell did he end up in an elite light infantry unit with a ranger tab? Her brain kept running through possible answers and scenarios as to why, but no answer left her satisfied. She didn't want to offend him, but her curiosity got the better of her. Then, why did you become a hell jumper and go to ranger school? Kuribayashi hesitated before fully asking the question. Well, life is strange. The opportunity came up and I said, fuck it, why not? I was just too angry to quit, Eli answered. An answer which left her even more unsatisfied than whatever she initially imagined. Kuribayashi was silent as she thought about how interesting Eli was. He is a contradiction of a man. He was both the most clever and determined person she ever met, and at the same time the laziest and the most stubborn. What about you? Eli asked. This took her by surprise. She assumed she wore the reason why she was here on her sleeves. To shoot people and blow things up, she replied immediately. Eli cursed his own stupidity. Why did he even ask? Why did he expect any other answer? Of course you do, he said in almost exasperation. Yep, after my 4-year contract is up, I'm going to go for Special Forces selection. They kept walking and talking, getting to know each other a little better while they kept their pace towards the gate. They seemed to be engrossed in their chat until they ran into Coleman and Schmidt. Waiting for them leaned against the divider. The two men were leaning against the wall and gawked at Kuribayashi and Eli, who had their arms still interlinked. Realizing they were in front of who they were trying to catch up to, they both turned red, and Kuribayashi swiftly uncoiled her arm from Eli's, and immediately took a step to the side. Schmidt had a shit-eating grin, but Coleman was just staring at Eli as if he had seen something outrageous. Really? You know NCOs can't fraternize with lower enlisted, right? Especially since she's in our fire team, he said in reprimand. You're dating an officer from an alien military that we're subordinate to. Eli immediately shot back to shut the sergeant up. Coleman just lifted his hand and covered his eyes to try to preemptively massage the headache forming. We're not You know what? I'm just going to pretend I didn't see anything. Smart, Eli said. When he looked to his side at Kuribayashi, her face was flushed deep red, but she had an equally large shit-eating grin as Schmidt. We're dating? She said coyly. Eli weighed his options. He just jumped from one pile of shit into another. His mind started to race, going through every possible scenario and internally simulating every outcome. Finally, he remembered an adage from an old movie. What a strange game. The only winning move was not to play. And so, he just chose to ignore everything around him and pushed Coleman through the gates. Let's just go get something to eat and hang out with your girlfriend, Eli said to redirect attention back on the sergeant. Laying in the grass of the Imperial Recreational Area, Coleman enjoyed his 10-minute break from the comprehensive grammar lessons Lyria came up with. If she was anything, she was an amazing teacher and had the patience of a saint. And beautiful. Coleman watched as her pure white hair flowed in the wind, carrying an alien but pleasant fragrance to his nose. She sat with her legs crossed, fiddling with her datapad. He couldn't help but stare at her thick legs, wondering how much of it was muscle and how much of it was fat. He couldn't help but imagine laying his head on them and having her gently and slowly stroking his head. Turning his head, Coleman could see the rest of the fire team keeping distance, knowing to give him space. He could tell Kuribayashi was openly flirting and teasing the poor surly medic in the distance. He was going to have to get Eli and Kuribayashi to tone it down, until she was promoted. But who is he to judge? Looking back towards Lyria, she seemed to notice his gaze as she turned her head and locked eyes with him. She gave a toothy smile, which made his heart flutter. What? Is something the matter? Lyria asked innocently. Coleman's eyes averted away from her as he wondered how long this would last. How long would he be able to play the student who had a crush on his teacher? How long until he would catch a piece of frag or a stray plasma bolt? Would he regret anything if he had? He locked eyes with her again. This time he felt an initial burst of determination. But when he opened his mouth, he couldn't say the words he wanted to. Lyria's heart started to tighten, as she could see something was definitely the matter. He never looked this concerned before. Did she do something wrong? She turned to him and clutched her chest. Did something happen? Did I do something wrong? She said uneasily. Coleman noticed Lyria was going in the wrong direction. No, I just don't know how long we can keep this up, he said, trying to cover up a misunderstanding. Lyria froze. She was starting to deeply misunderstand. A new anxiety started to grip her. She felt as if she was going somewhere. Richard, what's wrong? Are you okay? She said in a shaky, uncertain tone. Coleman kept staring, his mind in turmoil. He just needed to fucking say it. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. This was it. He was going to say what he wanted to since he saw her sitting at that table. Coleman opened his mouth. I think... He got out as Lyria was on the edge of her seat. I think I'm... He tried to get the words out. I think I'm just a little stressed. He lied. Lyria did something unconsciously that she would never have the courage to do. Something unbecoming of a woman of her station. She hugged him. If you need to talk, I'll always listen. I hope you're okay. She squeezed him tightly. Coleman was abashed with both shame and euphoria, as she felt and smelled as good as he always imagined. God, he hated himself.